take 1957, which I thought was a really interesting part of your book, because there we have a flu that seems to be particularly nasty. What was the difference? And Eisenhower barely mentioned it. I mean, it was not. One amazing things about 1918 is that Woodrow Wilson never made a public statement about the flu, and no statement was made in the House of Commons as it was destroying the British population too. There was a different attitude towards disease. It was almost as if this is kind of normal. And at the same time, there was a really successful mobilization in 1957. That the American government seemed to be more capable. The American people seem more willing to sacrifice and to act collectively than they are today. Is that a fair analogy?
I don't want to overdraw it, because I think there are big differences. The US did not have an especially bad experience of the 57-58 Asian flu, but globally, it was comparably bad as a pandemic. I think COVID will end up worse when it's done, but they're about level pegging in terms of the percentage of the world's population that they've both killed. So that event, 57-58, is closer to COVID than 1918-19, which was a far worse, 30 or 40 times worse disaster. But in 1957-58, there were no lockdowns, there were no school closures, there was no state of emergency. And the Eisenhower administration simply said, well, the health advice that he got was, we can't stop this spreading. We'll just focus on getting a vaccine. And he said, fine. And a modest amount of federal money was made available, and the vaccine was found even faster than in our time. That's what people did. So 2 takeaways, or 3 maybe. One, they did not have the option to do a lockdown because you couldn't all work from home. Hardly anybody could work from home in 1957. So we had an option that really didn't exist in the 1950s when there was a pandemic. Second observation, I think that meant that the federal government didn't even try to stop the spread because it knew it couldn't. And therefore, the focus had to be exclusively on the pharmaceutical response, which was impressively fast. Don't believe the people who say that what happened last year with our vaccines was unprecedented. They did it far faster in 1957. But the third point, which really struck me as I was reading, and it goes to things that you've written about, was that the American public, and this was true, I think, of the British public too, regarded a year of excess mortality as nothing terribly out of the ordinary and just something that you had to deal with. And this was a disease that killed young people, unlike COVID, which 80% of the people it kills are over 65, roughly speaking. Teenagers had 30% excess mortality in 1957. It was a disease that spread right through the young population and made many ill and killed more than was normal. So in that sense, it was worse, because imagine if we'd gone through that experience, the one we just had. But it wasn't just the elderly we were worried about. We were worried about little kids or teenagers. I struggle to imagine how much more agonizing and frightening that would have been for me. So I think there's a very big difference in public sentiment and in the thinking of the bureaucracy of the government. In public sentiment, there is no politicization of the vaccine issue that I'm aware of. That public health issues don't seem to belong in the realm of partisan politics. And there's a kind of nimbleness that one encounters looking at the records of the 1950s in the governmental response. CDC is a relatively young and relatively small organization, and they seem a lot quicker on their feet than their counterparts were in 2020. So 2 things seem different. The America of today is unquestionably more deeply divided and capable of politicizing every issue. And the American government, the federal government, seems a much less nimble and much more cumbersome and ultimately ineffectual organization, despite its being larger and better resourced.